Well, hello there. You are watching the Press Preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with the director of the Onward think tank, Sebastian Payne, and the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome to both of you. So plenty to discuss, as I'm sure you're aware. Let's start with the Financial Times then, shall we? Describing the Prime Minister as having headed off a right-wing revolt to win tonight's Commons vote on the Rwanda Migration Bill. Sunak faces down Rwanda rebels. That is the front of the Daily Telegraph. The Metro reacts to tonight's result with the headline, Rishi saves his bacon. But, says the Eye, the threat hasn't gone away and Mr Sunak is still facing another showdown with party rebels in the new year. As The Guardian puts it, he's avoided a major rebellion over the bill for now. That's also the sting in the tail for the front page of the Daily Mail. And those same two words also feature in the Express headline. Well, according to The Mirror, that means he's facing the nightmare after Christmas, you might say instead. And finally, the Daily Star has a hair-raising story. The comb-over is back, and it's all thanks to Donald Trump. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of the papers for yourself while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to them. Joined by Sonia and Sebastian. Welcome to both of you. So, for now, Sebastian, should we pick up on that we saw in many a newspaper? Rishi saves his bacon for now.
Yeah, this seems to be the theme across all the front pages tomorrow, that this was seen as a big flash moment for Rishi Sunak's premiership, this legislation he's been wanting to put through on dealing with Rwanda and the policy to have deportations there. It went to the House of Commons, and many right-wing elements of the Conservative Party were saying there was going to be a big rebellion, they might defeat the bill, but ultimately they didn't. And I think people in Downing Street will be pretty happy tonight, because first of all, not a single Conservative MP voted actively against the legislation. You also saw right-wingers like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Ian Duncan-Smith going through the lobbies to actively vote for it. And on those abstentions, which is essentially where you sit on your hands and you're not endorsing it, but you're not trying to bring it down, the number of that is about 29, which is lower than some of the rebels had predicted. But for that for now point you picked up on there, the key point is what's going to happen in the third reading, so everyone can go off over Christmas, maybe think about some other things, but I'm sure some will not, and this will come back to the House of Commons in January. And at that point, many of the critics, the rebels we've been hearing a lot from over the past couple of days, will try and amend it. And the question is, do they convert those abstentions into no votes? And I guess the calculation in Downing Street will be the fact that actually they won't do that, and they're not actually going to bring it down, and they'll try and find some compromise. But if they do vote it down, 29 is literally the exact number of them who would all have to vote against to stop it getting through. So if you think today's been a day of high drama and lots of whipping, just wait to see what that third reading vote will look like come January.
Yes, and 57 abstentions would have had the same impact as 29 votes against, and instead they had 37 abstentions, so there was the difference. The Metro starts talking about the breakfast butties at this breakfast meeting, the bacon butties rather, and the charm offensive all day. Now, certainly one wonders what Rishi Sunak has said to those 5 right-wing rebel groups that made them abstain and not vote against. Marc Francois, for example, he of the European Research Group, said Rishi Sunak showed he's willing to move, but if he moves too far, then on the other side they say no thank you.
So there have been a lot of comparisons with Brexit here, and for good reason. And Rishi Sunak's issue is he's got a very, very divided Conservative Party. There are some MPs who think this legislation actually goes way too far already in terms of breaking the UK's international commitments. They don't think it's the right thing for us to do, to be sending asylum seekers, some very vulnerable asylum seekers, to Rwanda. They don't think it's going to have a significant impact, deterrent impact, on people risking their lives to cross the Channel. And then there are people on the right of the party, plenty of people, who don't think that this legislation goes far enough. So it's sort of, he's in a very tight spot. Now, I'm not surprised that he didn't lose this vote today. I know there was a lot of speculation today, but it would have been pretty extraordinary for a Prime Minister to, often a second reading bill when a government's got majority is seen as a formality, and a Prime Minister hasn't lost one of these votes since 1986. So I'd have been very surprised if it would have been momentous if he'd failed at this stage. But the problem he's got is he has probably made some of these, promises, indications at these sort of breakfasts, one-on-one meetings he's been having all day. And it's a circle he can't square, or is it square you can't circle.
Whatever it is,
it's
we get
a circle he can't square. Because at the end of the day, there's not very much that he can do to make his whole party happy. I think the thing, though, when you take a step back from this, is we've got to remember we're arguing about a piece of legislation that, even if it passes the Commons, is quite unlikely to pass the Lords before the next general election. Even if you see some people deported
It's emergency
to Rwanda.
legislation. It's supposed to be going through quickly, isn't it?
Yeah, but the Lords definitely have the power to block it, should they show wish. They've got the power to amend it. Even if it passes the Lords, the chances of more than actually a small handful relative to the number of asylum seekers that the government now has to detain permanently under legislation that it's passed, it's going to be a very small proportion. It's a great expense to the British taxpayer, and I think it leaves a lot of us just scratching our heads thinking the Home Office's own analysis said that these sorts of schemes are unlikely to have a significant deterrent effect on people risking their lives across the Channel. And you just got to think, why on earth did Rishi Sunak pick this fight? Because no expert really thinks it's going to work. And it just seems like we've got a party at the end of 13 years of government that doesn't really want to govern anymore and has got a bit of a sort of kamikaze wish, really.
Yeah. Well, a little box in the on the FT front page from one of their commentators, the most business-minded Premier in UK history, like a lot of trespassers into politics, doesn't understand fanatics. How could he? In his former line of work, everyone is open to a deal, but he doesn't get the fanatic part of the party. Is that his problem, do you think, Sebastian?
Well, clearly not, because not a single MP voted against the legislation today. You know,
For now.
The whole point is now, I disagree with Sonia's characterisation that people have strong views on it. It's a very, very emotive topic, and this is also a very tough piece of legislation. You know, Lord Sumption, the former Supreme Court Justice, have said it's the toughest piece of immigration legislation that's gone through in the last 13 years, and that's something that does matter because this is an issue that the public feel very strongly about. Research that my think tank Onward has done has shown that migration and making sure control of borders is pretty much up there in the top 5 issues after, you know, the cost of living crisis and the NHS waiting lists.
Much less significant than it was in the run-up to Brexit, though.
But it's still very important, and it's still very important to a lot of votes about who comes in and out of the country, so I think you shouldn't dismiss that. But this point about unity and all the rest of it, I was pointing to the fact there was serious talk about this being a much bigger rebellion. It didn't materialise. No one voted against the legislation. They've gone along with it. It's not necessarily going to be straight sailing from now. But I think what you do see here is that the Conservative MPs see that there is something they have to get behind because there isn't really an alternative at this stage. And the Rwanda solution is only part of a much wider package. And the fact is, there's been a returns deal to Albania. That's reduced them by a lot. And I think we should be talking a lot more about that because that's one thing Labour has been saying would be a key part of their strategies to have more return deals. And I think Rwanda, it's not just about the actual numbers. It's about incentives here. It's about trying to say to people, if you come here, Rwanda means you may not end it, you may go straight there, and that will ultimately have a big deterrent effect to reduce the numbers. So I think it is important, and ultimately the question is going to be, come January, where are the areas they can find place to tweak and change legislation? Are there any areas? And when it comes to it, do the people who are concerned about it want to bring the whole edifice of the bill down, or do they have to hold their noses? That's the real question. On the one nation point, the more left wing of the Conservative Party, I mean, the fact is they were concerned about it, but again, there was only, I think, 2 of the rebels, you'd say, are definitely in the one nation group there, who were concerned about the European Court of Human Rights element. So, you know, there are people who've got strong views on this, but ultimately, I said, just look at the numbers today. They're much better than people expected. So I'm really not sure that this disunity thing stands up.
But my prediction is that some version of this legislation will eventually pass because Tory MPs know they've kind of got to get behind the Prime Minister. If it ends up being effectively a confidence vote, it could lead to an earlier general election and it could lead to a lot of them losing their seats earlier than they want to. So my prediction is it will pass, but not before 2-3 months where it consumes massive political oxygen, and then you've got the issue of getting it through the Lords. And I come back to this point. Look, most experts don't think it's going to solve the issue at hand anyway. So it does really feel like the Conservative Party kind of eating itself.
Well, I mean, the Eye talks about a New Year showdown with the Tory rebels. Prime Minister seeing off a potential rebellion against his authority by winning a crunch vote. Right-wingers back down from their threat to vote against the bill after saying they could not support it in its current form, vowing instead to push for tough changes in the new year. The Guardian, Sunak avoids a major rebellion over Rwanda deportation bill for now. So how does he not get distracted by this? How does he make his premiership in the new year not just about this and, you know, start leading again? It's going to be like the Brexit vacuum in the rest of politics, isn't it?
Well, to go back to what we're talking about where this sits on what people care about. I do think people really do care, and particularly the group of voters who are going to be crucial to deciding the next election outcome, which is the people who voted Conservative in 2019 are now sitting the don't know column.
Are you suggesting that they're making a big deal of it in order to grab those people's attention?
I think that's a strategy, but I personally don't think it's going to be effective, because if you look at the polls, cost of living and the NHS comes far, far in front. And I really think the next election is going to be an economy election. The Conservatives want to try and make it about something else, but I'm just not sure that's going to work.
But I think it can be shockingly more than one thing at the election. There might be a whole bunch of things people want to talk about, and I think cost of living is hugely important. That is the number one thing facing people at the moment. But you can't just brush aside immigration. And I do think as well there's been a lot about the Conservative Party here. Keir Starmer has said that he will scrap the Rwanda scheme. He announced that this morning on Radio 4. If he does that, and if it is on the statute book, and it does happen, and flights do take off, is he still going to pull it apart at that point? And I think there are some big questions for Labour on where they're going to go on this, because at the moment, they want to do more return deals. I think the government's going to do more return deals, so it's not exactly clear what they're going to do differently. But I think, if I can just finish this point, I do think that come next year, there needs to be a focus on all these things. It can't just all be about this. It does need to be about the cost of living. It does also need to be about public services.
But I'm not even talking about an election. I'm talking about January, where we have the crisis normally in the NHS, where last year we had ambulance queuing.
Absolutely.
You know, you do not want to get sucked into this hole. If we look at the Mail and the Express and all the newspapers leading on this again, you know, this Tory factional fighting.
It does have sort of... It really kind of reminds me of Brexit, actually, where you had this sort of big fight consuming Westminster parliamentary politics, and you didn't really have MPs focused on the huge challenges, substantial challenges.
What would you like MPs to do in Parliament for the NHS?
Actually, on the NHS, I would like them to be talking about funding and reforms. But on this
stuff... the big workplace plan that was passed quite recently, the biggest in the NHS's history.
Well, Seb, but if you look at what experts are saying about the NHS, so we're under... I mean, we're not actually talking about the NHS here, but I can talk plenty about the NHS.
We need to wrap this up.
OK, fine.
Yeah,
all right.
Apologies. Anyway, there's the Mail. Sunak sees off the Tory Rwanda rebels for now, so it's a for now theme, certainly, in their coverage. Lots more still to come, including connected, you might argue, an asylum seeker dies on board the controversial Bibi Stockholm barge. That after this break. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Sebastian Payne and Sonia Sodha. Welcome back to both of you. While the debate over Rwanda, the deportation bill, if you like, for asylum seekers was raging in the House of Commons, we had news that the Bibi barge, the Bibi Stockholm barge, had its first tragedy with somebody apparently taking their own life. Sonia, it brings it into, sharp relief, does it not, what this is all about?
Definitely. And, there's been controversy swirling over the Bibi Stockholm for a really long time, because the idea is that asylum seekers who come to the UK will be housed on this barge, 500. You've had the Fire Services Union saying, well, there's a fire risk. You've had all sorts of issues with bacteria like Legionella. So real question marks over whether this is an appropriate place to house some very vulnerable people who fled conflict zones. But as you said, Anna, we've had really tragic news emerging that somebody has died on the barge. Reports are that he might have taken his own life. And this will raise, it's obviously you have to be very careful when we talk about people taking their own lives. We have to abide by reporting guidelines around not attributing simple causes to particular deaths. But this will certainly raise questions about the conditions on the barge that were already being asked before this tragedy happened. And particularly, I think, people with very significant mental health issues who may have experienced torture and persecution being kept on a barge where you've got 4 men to a room where apparently relations between staff and the people there in very difficult conditions are not, that there are tensions. And
they suggested if they go out for a cigarette, they have to sort of be checked before they go back into the
exactly. And it's been reported,
and
and I think it's very important that there is an independent investigation to the circumstances surrounding this particular death. But it has been reported by other people that he was asking for help, that guards gave him a phone number, but he didn't have a phone, and that he may have felt very isolated. Now, it's obviously very important not to speculate. There does need to be an independent investigation, but this absolutely comes against people arguing for months, charities raising questions about the human rights of people.
OK. I do want to get on to Israel. Words from Joe Biden privately to donors tonight, talking about international support for Israel ebbing away because of the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza and the right-wing nature of Netanyahu's government causing problems for him, Sebastian.
It's fascinating to see this sort of point where the US is obviously the most steadfast ally of Israel and has always been fully behind it in these actions. But I think there's been a lot of speculation in the international community there might reach a point at which things have crossed the line. And it seems with these comments that it might have got to that point. And Joe Biden was caught making these comments, I think it was a donor dinner in America, and essentially said two things. Number one was about the IDF's campaign in Gaza. The second was about the nature of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, which, as we know, contains some very controversial figures from the extremes of Israeli politics. But what it does seem to raise this question is about whether the US is sort of saying, have you got to a point where you need to change strategy here? And it could well be that there is more pressure on that, and that as the weeks go ahead, and we see the US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin is flying out to Israel to sort of discuss this matter and see where it goes. But ultimately, this seems like a signal or a hint that the US is going to start nudging Israel in a different direction, perhaps, or a slightly different direction from what it's been doing at the moment. Despite those, obviously, the confidence in the IDF, they've been saying that it's always a targeted campaign.
Yes, and obviously we saw President Biden there alongside Volodymyr Zelensky trying to come and unpick $61 billion worth of money, which is stuck inside Congress right now. Both of you, thank you very much indeed. We will see more from you a little bit later on. Full look at the papers coming up as well.